has been a while. This video is going to be about something very topical at the moment. As the tank has evolved, so have ways of destroying it. Many weapons have been devised to exploit the weaknesses of armor. One of the most effective methods of destroying a tank is by striking it from the top, where the armor is weak. Case in point, this video is going to be about top attack anti-tank guided missiles. More specifically, this video is going to be a response to a video by Red Effect. Red Effect is a YouTuber who makes videos about tanks, showing particular interest in the Russian variety. But videos on Western tanks and everything in between are also present. It's because of this focus on Russian tanks that a lot of people accuse Red Effect of being biased, which I do not agree with. Accusations of bias are generally just a way of shutting down the conversation. Oh, you're just biased, so I don't have to listen to you. However, if there is a bias with Red Effect, I think it's more about narrative, not necessarily because he likes Russian tanks. We'll get more into that later. Today, we're going to be responding to his video, Why Top Attack is Not as Good as You Think. Let me preface this by saying that I'm not here to say this video is terrible, but definitely lacking. As the video begins, you would think this is going to be about the Javelin and the TOW-2B.
You've probably heard how Javelin or TOW-2B are the ultimate weapons for killing tanks because they target the vulnerable roof armor, which is very thin and thus guarantee that the tank will be destroyed. Well, the reality is a bit different. While they are really excellent weapons, they do have some shortcomings when compared to other anti-tank launchers.
Which would be fine. But then you remember the title, and it quickly becomes clear that this video is actually about top attack capabilities, with a focus on man-portable top attack ATGMs. For further context, if we read the description, this video is meant to show the shortcomings of the Javelin and the TOW-2B when compared to other anti-tank weaponry, which gives the impression that Red Effect seems to think that top attack ATGMs are an American-only thing. Now, I want to give Red Effect the benefit of the doubt, and Red, if you are watching this, I want to make it absolutely clear that I'm not saying this is what you believe. It's just the way the information is presented that gives that impression. To make a video on man-portable top-attack ATGMs that just laser focuses on the Javelin and TOW-2B, and doesn't mention things like the NLAW, Raybolt, Spike, or Bill, which entered service well before the Javelin did, it's a little confusing. And if the impetus for focusing on the Javelin and TOW-2B are ideas that were being espoused in documentaries you saw, you should be showing them, or showing the parts that you are addressing. Or if it's copyright that you're worried about, at least link to them. It would add context to the motivations behind your video. Now we get into armor values. A large piece of this puzzle implies that we know the penetration of the Javelin. Red Effect claims that the Javelin has 750mm of penetration.
The problem here is that, by default, Javelin has 750mm of penetration. After older ERA, it would probably have around 600mm of penetration, based on all tandem-shaped heat with similar performance.
In which the three sources provided by Red Effect do not substantiate. The first source is about armor protection on Ukrainian tanks, the article on the TOW missile is just that, and the third is a document about US military spending. This is a huge document, and even with a few Control Fs, I couldn't really make heads or tails of what we're supposed to be getting from it. Though I assume with a fair amount of certainty that it's supposed to be about the price of the Javelin. So I'm not really seeing where we're getting the penetration values for the Javelin from. I tried looking it up, and the value was almost exclusively on articles and forums, a lot of which were written in the last couple of weeks, possibly spurred on by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, primarily because the Javelin was at the forefront of weapons being supplied to the Ukrainians. I can't for the life of me figure out where people are getting this number from, the earliest source being from a magazine. None of this is particularly screaming reputable to me, but the important thing is we don't have a source here. Also, here's something interesting. For every article and forum that listed 750mm, I found 2 that gave 600 or 800mm of penetration. Typically when numbers are being thrown around like this, it's kind of an indicator that we just don't know. This is just way too speculative to come up with any meaningful conclusion. At the end of the day, we definitely need more sources than this. The next point that is made is that the area on top of the tank that the Javelin is supposed to hit is very small.
Why does it matter when Javelin is impacting the roof armor? Well, there is a big problem. The roof armor is actually a really small area. Realistically, the turret roof would be the area you would want to hit, since hitting the little you can of the hull's roof wouldn't be enough to destroy the tank. But the problem is that the Javelin missile doesn't hit directly from above, but at an angle, and the further the target is, the sharper the angle the missile will make. Now, when I said that the turret roof is the small area, I wasn't kidding. To the naked eye, it can seem big, but you have to keep in mind the thickness of the composite armor of the tank's turret. The area where only thin roof armor would be present is smaller than the entire area of the turret. Now, take into consideration that the missile isn't impacting the tank directly from above, and the kill area becomes much smaller. Because if you hit the roof from an angle closer to the edges, it will enter on the top and exit on the side, which wouldn't actually destroy the tank.
There's a lot to unpack here. Unless you can come up with data that the Javelin has a hard time hitting this area, with today's missiles and guidance technology, that's not really an issue. If this is a problem, then this is not so much a criticism of the Javelin as it is a criticism of missiles or even guidance systems in general. Intended targets of missiles and guided munitions can be quite small. We test Stinger missiles against dinky little drones with propellers. We can drop guided munitions within centimeters of a target. With today's guidance systems, the size of a target really isn't an issue. In fact, I would argue that if the target is small, then using a Javelin would be advantageous, because instead of, say, having to continuously optically track a target to guide the missile, the computers do the guidance for you. But to clarify, Red Effect isn't just talking about a small target, but rather a small area on a vehicle, specifically the roof of the tank. Red Effect emphasizes that the Javelin, being an infrared-guided missile, can't differentiate areas of a tank.
Javelin is not guaranteed to hit the roof armor of the tank's turret. The missile does not have a brain, it follows the thermal signature, it can't differentiate the turret from the hull, so the chances of it hitting this area are practically proportional to the ratio of this area compared to the rest of the tank.
Which is true. However, something that this video failed to mention is that Javelins are designed not only to hit the top of the tank, but also the middle of it. It doesn't just aim for a random spot on top of the tank. The Javelin is programmed to specifically target center mass, to increase the likelihood of hitting that weak spot. I think it's also important to talk about PK, or probability of kill. Did you know that a system's ability to kill a target isn't just speculation based on a bunch of random numbers you find on the internet? It's actually something that can be tested and measured. Probability of kill combines probability of hit, probability of lethality, and reliability of the system to calculate the likelihood of killing a target on the first shot. According to DTIC documents, testing of the Javelin showed an average probability of kill of around 91% against stationary T-72s. That's not just a majority, that's an overwhelming majority of Javelins killing their targets. To be fair, these were early tests, most likely not taking into account newer Russian armor, but the crux of the argument, which relies on the Javelin being inaccurate, is not something you can count on. Now, of course, the Javelin is not perfect, it can always miss. But the problem here is that Red Effect doesn't really explain how this isn't also a problem for other anti-tank weapons. Because, remember, this isn't just talking about the shortcomings of the Javelin, this is supposed to be comparing the Javelin to other anti-tank weapons. Unfortunately, Red Effect doesn't really elaborate on this. SACLO systems and RPGs are subject to human error, and the area they aim for can be quite small. Hence why in this video, when French troops try to hit a moving truck with a Milan ATGM, it misses. Now, obviously, this is not a summation of SACLOS missiles. I'm not saying they're bad because a guy missed. I'm saying that this could be a situation where a Javelin could come in handy. The truck is comparatively a small target, plus you're looking at it from the front, making it appear smaller, so a Javelin might be a preferred weapon in this particular situation. That truck was destroyed by a Javelin, by the way. And this also kind of illustrates another advantage the Javelin has over other ATGMs, which is that it can strike targets from any angle. Another reason why this complaint about the target area being small is strange is because periodically Red Effect makes videos about how to destroy certain tanks. How accurate these videos are I can't really attest to, and it's not really relevant, but a lot of these areas appear to be quite small.
This is where you would want to aim at, since there is no ERA present behind the infrared searchlight. It's a perfect spot to achieve penetration. The best place would be right at or slightly under the driver's vision blocks. That's because the armor is slightly cut to allow the vision blocks to go all the way down to the driver. The area of the turret with no ERA protection can also be a target.
This is also an example of that narrative bias I mentioned earlier. The problem is that in these videos, Red Effect is presenting these areas as things that can be exploited. But when it comes to the small area on top of the tank, Red Effect presents this as a weakness for the Javelin. This situation has the trademarks of a double standard. In other words, applying a set of principles to one thing, but not another. Another thing that I take issue with is that Red Effect makes too much of a fine point on destroying the tank. First of all, there just seems to be this focus on destroying a tank in one hit. I mean, that's fine if that's the goalpost you want to go with, but just for the record, you can fire more than one Javelin at a tank. Let's forget about PK for a second. Even if you don't outright destroy a tank, you can do all sorts of things to degrade it that would make it unsuitable for the crew. You can knock out sensors, you can destroy sights, weaponry, you can kill crew members, you can get a mobility kill by knocking out the engine. These are just as important as destroying a tank. Because in a battlefield context, a tank that is unable to fight, but is in otherwise repairable condition, serves the same purpose as a tank that just got its turret blown off. Sometimes it's not about destroying the tank, but stopping it from fighting. Strangely, Red Effect actually makes this point in several of his videos.
And therefore, if you manage to penetrate the tank in previously mentioned area, you will not necessarily destroy it, but you can achieve a critical hit by either killing the commander or knocking down the main gun.
But doesn't seem to apply the same logic to the Javelin. The next criticism that Red Effect has is that the Javelin tends to hit the side armor of the tank, as opposed to the top, and he does provide video evidence.
Another big issue with the missile not hitting directly from above is that many times it hits the side armor of the tank, and you can actually see that in videos online. This mainly happens on the older tanks, which either have no ERA or they have ERA that does not affect tandem-shaped hit, so the result is, of course, the destruction of the tank.
That's very true. It does appear to hit the side of the tank, but these are not in top attack mode. Again, Red Effect, I want to give you the benefit of the doubt. I don't want to presume what you think. But judging by the context of the information that's presented thus far in the video, the conclusion I've drawn is that you seem to think the Javelin is a top attack only weapon. Because an important thing that this video has unfortunately failed to mention up to this point is that the Javelin has a secondary direct attack mode. Judging by how close the target is, this is an exercise for the Javelin's minimum engagement distance in direct attack mode, which is 65 meters. The minimum engagement distance in top attack mode is 150 meters. The next criticism, well, I'll let him say it.
Another problem is that the Javelin can't be used in urban areas or forests because it can't be fired on close range and the missile can hit the buildings and trees way before it reaches its target.
That's not true. The Javelin can be used in urban environments and close ranges. To clarify, in a military context, close-range combat, or close-quarter combat, is fighting that takes place within 100 meters. As stated before, in direct attack mode, the Javelin has a minimum engagement distance of 65 meters, well within close-range combat distances. Now, I think Red Effect is referring to top attack mode, which, while the minimum engagement distance is well beyond close-quarter combat, that doesn't mean it can't be used in built-up areas. Obviously, it's not preferable, it would certainly be limited, but it can be used in urban environments. If we consult the Javelin field manual and read the portion regarding urban combat, it definitely emphasizes the limitations of the system around buildings, but also says this. Although the Javelin is primarily used to defeat main battle tanks and other combat vehicles, it has a moderate capability against bunkers, buildings, and other fortified targets, commonly found during combat in built-up areas. Javelin teams provide overwatching fires during the attack of a built-up area. Within built-up areas, they are best employed along major thoroughfares and from upper floors of buildings or roofs to attain long-range fields of fire. Another thing that Red Effect failed to mention, but shows a lot in this video, is that the Javelin has a soft launch capability, which makes it more suitable not just for urban combat, but more specifically to be fired from confined spaces, such as buildings. Again, just because the conditions are not ideal, doesn't mean you can't do it. So, as we move towards the end of the video, Red Effect makes a claim that I find a little surprising. I'll let Red Effect talk, and we will discuss it.
Not to mention that T90M and MS have Aramid cover on the inside of the tank, so even if the penetrators manage to go through ERA and the roof armor, Aramid would probably either stop them or heavily degrade their performance.
Okay, so for those who don't know, Aramid is what Kevlar is made from, and Aramid fabric is just a fancy name for spall liner. Red Effect actually made a comment addressing this, saying that this scenario was about the TOW2B being degraded by the ERA and roof armor enough to, perhaps, be stopped by the Aramid fabric, which is very presumptuous at best. It just seems like most of the hypothetical situations in this video are slightly tilted in favor of the Russians. Even if that is true, even if that scenario plays out exactly like you said, and the penetrator is degraded after going through the armor of the tank, it's not going to be stopped by spall liner, because that's not the purpose of it. The whole point of spall liner is to protect against spalling, which are little flakes of metal that break off from the inside upon impact or penetration and fly around the tank, potentially injuring or even killing the crew, i.e. Hesh rounds. Unless there's been a development I don't know about, which Red Effect isn't elaborating on, if a penetrator goes through the armor, the spall liner just protects against secondary spallation, not the penetration itself. According to this study, entitled Technical Challenges of the U.S. Army's Ground Combat Vehicle Program, the capabilities of spall liners are outlined as such. The spall liner serves to prevent fragments, spall, generated during an impact or when a vehicle is penetrated from being projected toward the occupants and equipment inside the vehicle. This is later punctuated by a definition of spall liner, a material added to the inside of an armored vehicle structure, usually in the crew compartment, to absorb fragments from a penetrating round, but not the round itself.
But again, a hit to the turret's roof is not guaranteed. It has more chances to hit it than Javelin, but it can still hit other parts of the tank. The problems here are that the penetrators are kinda small. They can't penetrate much armor, and no information about their actual penetration can be found anywhere.
That's a contradiction. We don't have data on the TOW2B's penetration, but it won't penetrate much armor. That's a contradiction.
TOW2 launcher is practically a stationary weapon. For regular infantry, it can't be used in offensive. It is useful for armored vehicles though, but that requires them to be completely stationary until the missile reaches the target. And in modern era, with every tank having a thermal imaging system, that's not really the best idea. So Javelin would probably be better in offensive and TOW2B in defensive operations.
Which is true. Obviously the operator has to remain stationary when it's on that tripod, but that's not exclusive to the TOW2B. Red Effect doesn't really elaborate on why this wouldn't be a problem for other SACLOS missiles. I don't want to put too much of a fine point on this, but I want to reiterate that this video is supposed to be pitting the Javelin and TOW2B against other anti-tank missiles. Besides the point about the Javelin being expensive, this video really doesn't do that. The way the information is being presented is that this is an infliction on the TOW2B in particular, which is just false. Red, if you are watching this, it seems like you might have gotten a little confused. Clarification is needed. In conclusion, again, I want to reiterate, I'm not here to tell you this video is bad. That's not what I'm here to do. What I will say is that with the amount of information that was left out and the errors that followed, this video failed to poke a hole in top attack capabilities. This video drew its conclusions from a lot of speculation and assumptions with very little data, which is obviously just not a fair playing field. Occam's razor, which is the principle that the conclusion with the least amount of assumptions is true, is extremely useful in times like this. And that conclusion, with the least number of assumptions, is that top attack is very good. It's probably the best way of destroying tanks. Yes, at $80,000 the Javelin is expensive, but that's still way less than the tanks it's meant to destroy. Yes, there are an increasing number of countermeasures for top attack weaponry, but not every tank is a T-72B3M. There's plenty of tanks out there that do not have protection against top attack missiles. Again, while I'm not here to say that this video is terrible, there was certainly a lot left out. So that's it for now. Red, I advise you to read up on the Javelin. Don't just listen to people on Discord. Look up some DTIC documents, I'll put them in the description. If you have any contrary evidence to this, I'm willing to listen. But at the end of the day, your video needs a lot more supporting evidence. This is Dalek14MC, signing off.